All right, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome to CapTech's webinar, Big Data, Big Risk, Protecting Your Organization Through Data Governance. Thanks for taking time out of your day to attend this event. Today we're going to be spending about an hour, and we'll be covering the following topics. We'll do a quick round of introductions. We will talk about adapting data governance for the Enterprise Data Hub. We'll talk about some common pitfalls that we've seen in our implementations of big data solutions. We'll talk about the Cloudera Navigator product and how that can support your data governance initiatives. And then we'll go through a case study within the financial services industry on what we've done to implement and leverage data governance solution with Cloudera. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So with that, we'll do a quick round of introductions. My name is Ben Harden. I'm a managing director at CapTech. I've been in the data warehousing enterprise data governance space for about 17 years. I've been with CapTech for the last 7 years and have been focusing on delivering big data related solutions for the past 2 years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve and Mark to do an introduction. So Steve, if you want to start.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm going to apologize. I have a whole British-American accent going on. So I'm a Brit, but I've lived in the U.S. for a while. I joined Cloudera about 6 months ago. Prior to that, I ran strategy for a company that was doing mainframe data into Hadoop. And then prior to that, I was actually part of the team. I was originally the product manager for a product called DataStage, which is an ETL space. And I actually helped Essential IBM build out their stack of governance and metadata tools. So what was originally called Business Glossary and Metadata Workbench and is now called Information Governance Catalog. So I spent most of my career either doing data warehousing or metadata and governance and those pieces. And then Mark.
Oh, thanks, Steve and Ben. My name is Mark Donsky. I'm Director of Product Management here at Cloudera for our data management solutions. As Steve and Ben both said, thanks for joining.
Great. Thanks, Mark and Steve. So just before we get started, we wanted to give a quick introduction to CapTech and to Cloudera. So I'll start and tell everyone a little bit about CapTech. So we're a full services consulting organization, just under 500 employees. We're headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, with locations throughout the East Coast and national traveling team. And we do custom solutions from Java development, HTML5, API development, back-end cloud integration. We have customer engagement, digital strategy, visual design capabilities, and then my practice area, data and analytics, and what we'll be focusing on today. We offer services around big data, visualization, Hadoop and NoSQL architecture, analytics and data science, and then obviously the topic today, data governance. We also have a management consulting organization that provides agile transformation and coaching, program governance and strategy. And I think that's a really nice tie-in when we start talking about delivering big data solutions. Having the ability to have that agile coach and agile methodology fits in very well with delivering in a really fast-changing environment that is big data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve to give a brief overview of Cloudera.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. So Cloudera is actually just over 6 years old. And it's actually formed in the summer of 2008 when a small group from Oracle, Yahoo, Facebook, and Google, and I know I'm pronouncing Yahoo the British way, grouped together and formed a company specifically focused on delivering a big data platform built on Hadoop. So all of these guys had come across Hadoop in their various projects. And then what actually happened was that Doug Cutting, Cloudera's chief architect, who actually helped create Hadoop initially, and it was based out of necessity. As the web exploded and grew far beyond the ability of traditional data systems to handle it, it was inspired by some papers from Google. So Doug and another guy basically read those papers and came up with the idea of Hadoop and then incubated it within Yahoo. They kind of grew this out, and this framework is there for storing, processing, and analyzing hundreds of terabytes of data, even petabytes. It was actually named by Doug after his son's toy elephant. You can blame him for the crazy name. And when he actually founded the original Apache Hadoop project, it was with this open source vision firmly in mind. And all the Clouderians, as we kind of call ourselves internally, are really strongly committed to a community-driven, open source Hadoop-based platform ever since. So it's a huge investment. And you kind of fast forward to today. So having started 6 years ago, we've got over 750 employees, followed us on support, so development and engineering centers all around the world. We've got 1,400 partners, of which we count CapTech as a great partner in that space, that form this ecosystem around our enterprise data hub. And we've actually trained over 40,000 people around the world on both Hadoop and data science. So, really we're kind of the de facto standard on that side. And, when it comes to the continuing development of Hadoop as an open source project within the ecosystem, Doug was actually elected to the board of directors of the Apache Software Foundation back in September of 2010. So, it really is a huge investment for us, but it's game-changing in terms of what we're seeing in customer accounts. This whole big data thing can really be tackled with Hadoop and an enterprise data hub beneath that. So what's really interesting about big data is that people often use these 3 Vs. And I've got to give due credit to Doug Laney from Gartner, who originally came up with the framework back in 2001. And amusingly, I've seen so many attempts to add additional Vs to volume, velocity, and variety. I actually think the 3 Vs as they are the best way forward. So I prefer to stick with the tried and tested 3. But the key point here is even though you're dealing with much greater volumes, much greater variety, and much greater velocity of data in your organization, the same base principles you've been investing in terms of data governance and data management still apply. And in fact, it's even more important once you suddenly have the ability to bring together both structured and unstructured data across the organization in a single place, process it, and really take value from it. All the existing investments you've made around stewardship, et cetera, become even more important. So you've got to still be able to do, capture the business metadata, catalog all that metadata and figure out, where it comes from, where it's going to. You've got to be able to search it. You've got to be able to deliver data lineage across those things. So all the same things you've already invested in become just even more important in a big data or Hadoop environment. So within Cloudera, we talk about something called an enterprise data hub. So this is the opportunity of taking Hadoop and kind of pushing it into your organization and taking full advantage of a single place to store all your data, structured and unstructured, for as long as desired or required in its original fidelity. So, no sampling of data. You can store all the data that's sourced. And you integrate that into existing frameworks. So if you've got existing reporting tools and analysis tools, it will plug into that. And you can then perform a variety of enterprise workloads there across both batch and stream. And you can use, interactive SQL, you can use search, you can then do machine learning and advanced analytics on top of that data. All the while having a complete security, governance, data protection layer around it that these enterprises require. And metadata, so there are 2 topics you don't want me to talk about, one of which is metadata, because, all through my career, it has been the thing that I realized people never truly realize the value of until it's too late. And metadata is really the key to achieving this full concept of data monetization. All these organizations are starting to become data-driven. I mean, we're getting large banks which are suddenly realizing, hey, I'm not so much a bank as a data company with a banking business as part of it. Or I'm an insurance company. I'm really actually a data company that does some insurance sales as well. So as these companies all become data-driven, they also realize that governance and protection of it becomes even more important. And metadata and governance, to use a sort of gaming analogy, in terms of monopoly and that get out of jail free card that you get in Monopoly, metadata provides that to the executive team. If they can show where the data came from, what happened to it, and how they're making decisions on it, that's what keeps them out of jail. And Ben and I were actually talking about this the other day, that without metadata, trying to find data inside, whether you call it a lake or an enterprise data hub, it's kind of like playing a card game I had as a kid, where you put 50 cards down on a table and you turn over 2 at a time trying to get a match. It's a memory game. But the reality of doing that in most enterprise environments without metadata is like playing that game, except instead of 50 cards on the table, you've got cards all over the table, all over the floor, all over the walls, in every room of the building you're in. It's just a massive scale issue, but you could automate that and you can actually apply technology to solve that problem. So bring Hadoop in for the storage and then actually apply the processing on top. You can take it away. And just like in the Terminator, if you played that game against a robot They're never going to get bored. They're never going to get tired. They're going to remember all the stuff you don't. So it's a case of using the technology wisely and then automating those things and still having a clerical review of governance there on top. So, yeah, we had a bit of fun joking around that.
Capturing what you have as you're ingesting versus trying to go back after the fact and understand what you've already ingested into your enterprise data hub can become extremely challenging. So, getting ahead of the game and being able to capture that metadata up front is really, really important.
So in terms of the value, so it's well proven in the industry now that storing data in Hadoop is vastly more cost-effective than in traditional systems. It can be anything from 20 to 100 times cheaper to store a terabyte of data in Hadoop than it is in a legacy application. What's really interesting is you then have all these regulations on top of that. You've got Basel, Dodd-Frank, BS 239, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, etc. So if you're going to put all your most valuable data in one place, you then have to protect it. And if you protect it in the right way, it can actually be the safest place to put your data. So we actually have a joint a customer with Cloudera, which has gone through a full PCI certification of their Hadoop cluster. The company is actually MasterCard, who actually helped write the PCI regulations, so they were pretty strict when it came to going through the test. But that means that you can store your data in here, have it fully PCI compliant, and then blend it with all your other data as well. So you need that security layer. You then need the governance. A key part of passing PCI is showing, the data access, etc. So that governance piece is super critical. And in addition, I was actually at a bank last week, and one of the senior execs made the point that 20 years ago, their CEO said that the information about the money was almost as important as the money itself, almost as valuable. The interesting thing today is that data is becoming the lifeblood of companies, and governance and control of that is becoming even more critical. So actually the metadata about the data is as critical, if not more critical, than the data itself. And just as data is growing at an exponential rate, metadata is growing as well. So your metadata can oftentimes be many times larger than the data itself. So having an infrastructure that can manage it, control it, and govern it is just, it's not even an option anymore. It's just something, a cost of doing business. So the key thing here is to blend those two together. And from a value perspective, a lot of people look at Hadoop initially from a cost-saving perspective, but then when they realize that they can get compliance and storage, but on the same time they can do cost savings, they can do customer 360, they can look at competitive differentiation, that's where the real value comes out. And really, Hadoop allows you to take something that was previously a cost center and turn it into a profit center.
Great. So as you're thinking about your journey into big data and into Hadoop, there's some things that definitely need to be considered. So we've talked a lot about open source and the power of open source software. Making sure that you understand if you're going to invest in open source software and you're going to stand that up in a production environment, that if you're going to go and download that software from the Apache Foundation and maintain that yourself, there's a lot of overhead involved. And so if you're planning on going into a production environment, having a vendor such as Cloudera be able to come in and provide some of that support, that enterprise hardening, testing of the application, I think is critical. We see clients run into this from time to time where they didn't consider the implications of trying to maintain everything in-house. Upgrades, again, similar vein of as things evolve, and this is a very quickly, very fast-paced environment where new applications, new software is being delivered routinely, being able to keep up with that and handle those implementations. If you have to do that by hand, it becomes very challenging. Tools like Cloudera Manager allow you to easily deploy packages across your enterprise clusters so that you don't have to go and do each machine individually. Schema management. So one of the big, powerful things about Hadoop is that we don't need to understand the schema of our data to land it. We can ingest everything and then over time start to describe and understand what the data is that we have, what the schema is of that data. But with that, we need a way to capture that schema, define that schema, and be able to share that with the organization so that they can add value and turn that data into information. So the management of schema within your big data environment is critical, just so that you can understand what's happening, what do I have, and make sure that all of the data consumers, data scientists are speaking the same language when they're talking about a specific set of data. Auditing. So clearly we have clients that are routinely audited from a compliance perspective, from an internal audit perspective, being able to know how data is being used, whether it's being used appropriately. Big data and the Hadoop environment are a very open environment that allow users to be able to go in and grab data as needed. So how do we protect that? How do we make sure that that we know what's going on within our enterprise data hub or data lake? And then finally, we know that Hadoop is a hot skill, and people are moving around a lot. So do you have a plan in place to get your organization up to speed? Do you have stewardship in the sense of training and education of your employees to make sure that you're prepared if there are departures? So common pitfalls that we've seen as we implement data governance solutions in the big data space and big data solutions in general, not engaging the business. So, that theme of people, process, and technology, oftentimes IT folks want to spend all of their time focusing on the technology and don't think so much about the people in the process. We need to make sure that we understand what are the use cases that we're trying to solve, engaging our business and making sure that they're giving that information to us. Downstream data consumption. So again, we don't want to build a data depository where we can put data in, but we can't get data out. We want to be able to deliver data innovation to our data consumers. And so in order to do that, we need to understand how they want to consume that data. Changing environment. I laugh. Steve and I were talking earlier that a year ago MapReduce was the hottest thing, and now here we are a year later, and it's MapReduce is dead. Spark is the latest hottest thing. So as you're going through your big data journey, being able to understand that things are going to change, new technologies are coming. They're coming very quickly, and being able to plan to learn about those, adapt to them, and start to leverage them is going to be critical. I mentioned Agile earlier. I think the Agile methodology fits in very well here for that specific reason. Again, data governance, that's really what we're here to talk about today. So we're talking about those 3 V's, right? High volume of data, high velocity of data. We've got tons of information coming into our organization. Do we know what we have? Do we have it protected appropriately? Do we know how to find it? Can we discover new insights about the information that we've got? All of those things are data governance related, and if we don't focus on that up front, we can quickly get behind and not realize the information that we've got or not realize how it's being used. Data architecture, so I touched on that a little bit with planning for change. It's really important to have the data architecture teams involved throughout your data lifecycle and movement into the Hadoop space because things are changing so quickly. We need their insight into how we fit into the bigger enterprise picture. We already talked about staffing and training, making sure that we have our organizations up to speed and learning the new technologies because they are changing so quickly and moving so fast. We need to make sure that we have an appropriate staffing and training plan available. And then the administration of all these tools. There are tools available for administration, but making sure that we have access to those and are using them. So things like Cloudera Manager help us manage the cluster so that we can focus our efforts on actually consuming and innovating with the data that we've got.
And on the education front, I mean, I would certainly say from the Cloudera side, we spend a huge amount of time in accounts just educating them on what Hadoop is, how it's different. So when you meet the data architecture team who are traditionally used to this whole I have a data source, I figure out what's in it, I spend a huge amount of time mapping that source into my existing model. I then spend even longer, building out an ETL process. I then finally deliver out some reports. And if a user asks for a new column or, a new report out, it's a 6-month lead time before we get to them. things about Hadoop that really change that. So the schema on read, schema on need nature, the fact that you can blend structured and unstructured data together and store it, just the low cost of storage. A lot of customers, initially go after the staging area downstream of something like a warehouse and then suddenly absorb everything else. Not to mention, as Ben was mentioning, some of the newer technologies like Spark or even machine learning on top of Hadoop. These are things you constantly have to educate people on. So never assume that people know what they're talking about. And if someone does kind of know what they're talking about, definitely, double check, because this space does move very quickly. And that's one of the natures of an open source driven project, is that it's not just a single company contributing, it's multiple companies driving this through.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit about Cloudera Navigator. So we have Mark, who's going to be covering that for us, and I don't want to steal your thunder on Navigator, Mark, so I'll pass it off to you, and you can take us through Cloudera Navigator.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so just very briefly, I know the folks on the call have heard a lot about Hadoop. So let me just be clear, just putting all the pieces together. Cloudera offers the leading distribution of Hadoop, and we have a product called Cloudera Enterprise. Cloudera Enterprise bundles or has Hadoop at its core, and then augments Hadoop with a variety of enterprise tools. You heard Ben mention Cloudera Manager. Cloudera Navigator is another one. So these are the tools that enable Cloudera or Hadoop in particular, to fit in and play nicely in the enterprise. I'm going to be talking about one of those components, which is the governance component called Cloudera Navigator. So just again, Cloudera Navigator is part of Cloudera Enterprise, which is our Hadoop distribution for the enterprise. Okay, now I'm sure that many of the folks are very familiar with governance issues. You've heard a lot already. I'm going to touch on some of these points and explain what Navigator does and why it's so important for Hadoop. And then I have a couple of screen snapshots just so you can see how the product looks. Okay, certainly if there are some questions, I can answer them afterwards. So, of course, you've heard about auditing. Auditing makes sure that you keep track of what people have tried to do in the system, what they have done in the system. But when you think about this with big data, what you have to realize is that in a typical Hadoop distribution, you have lots of structured data coming from the data warehouse, where you could have very clear columns and tables. You could have semi-structured data where you have log files that may contain credit card numbers as part of the log entry. Or you could have completely unstructured data. The unstructured data could be Adobe Acrobat files where you have sensitive information buried inside the Acrobat file, or it could be a digitized customer call recording where they're mentioning their mother's maiden name or something else like that. But regardless of the type of data, whether it's structured, semi-structured, or unstructured, you also have a lot of it inside big data environments. So the challenge here is keeping that very clear access or very clear visibility into who's accessing what, who's trying to access what, and even knowing where the sensitive data is located when you have so many diverse formats and so much of it. So Navigator, the approach that we take is we bring all of the disparate audit information. We haven't talked a lot about the different forms of accessing data in Hadoop, but one of the key things that makes Hadoop so powerful is that you have all your data stored in one location, but you have all these different ways of accessing the data. So if it makes sense to use a SQL interface, you can use Hive or Impala. These are components of Hadoop. You heard MapReduce and Spark. There's some custom code that you can write to parse the data and analyze the data. But the net result is there are lots of different ways of accessing the data that's stored inside Hadoop. And each of those different ways in a vanilla Hadoop distribution maintains its own audit log. The audit logs are in different formats. They're often the retention timeframes on these audit files are different. So if you have a user account that gets compromised and you need to figure out all the activity that took place on that account over the past few weeks, it's next to impossible to do that in a typical Hadoop distribution. Navigator, what we do is we bring all of that audit information into a single location. So you can see very clearly all the activity by account, by IP address, by artifact that's been accessed, and you don't have to worry about the data being retained because we do that automatically. So it's basically a turnkey solution to ensure that you have not just auditing, but all the other governance capabilities I'll speak about. So that's auditing, single location for everything. Now on the Lineage part, You've heard some conversation around Lineage, and to be very clear, from a governance perspective, Lineage answers a couple of important questions. So first off, if you end up printing any number in a financial report, a quarterly statement based off transformations that took place inside Hadoop, or more tangibly, let's say you're a pharmaceuticals company and you decide that a drug is safe to bring to market because of some analysis that took place off of petabytes worth of data inside Hadoop, or any other transformation that takes place, Lineage will show you and be able to defend all the decisions that took place based off the transformations. That's one way of Lineage. The other way of Lineage is looking for a given artifact, understanding how it's being used. So let's say you have sales transactions information, understanding how that flows through the system, who's using it, how they're using it, who's taking credit card numbers from there versus who's taking product codes or zip codes from there. Lineage will answer that as well. Lineage is really challenging in Hadoop because you have so many diverse data types and so much data taking place. But what Navigator does, and this is unique in the Hadoop space, we watch all the transformations that take place and from there reverse engineer based off the runtime artifacts all the lineage, all the way down to the column level. Okay, so if you're familiar with Lineage, we just do Lineage. But if you look underneath it, we capture Lineage for all these very diverse, complicated data sets and different kinds of transformations and present that holistically. So that might sound like a lot of words, but in a moment I'll show you the screen snapshot and you'll see exactly what that means. Steve spoke quite a bit about metadata, and I would make the case that metadata is really the basis of a much broader set of data management challenges that need to be solved. At the most basic level from governance, being able to retrieve the data inside your big data environment with pinpoint precision. Let's say you need to bring data from a particular clinical trial or a particular account, or you need to understand what the retention time frame is for certain artifacts. Metadata is about that. Okay, so in Hadoop, you have all these disparate file formats ranging from the structured to the completely unstructured. And what we do with Navigator is we present a unified metadata view of all the data inside there. So if you want to do things like show me all the files that are older than 7 years, or anything that contains sensitive data, or anything that is owned by this user and hasn't been classified with certain fields, and so on. Whatever classification makes sense for your business, we will do that for you. Okay, so it breaks up into the technical metadata, which are things like the file names, the owners, permissions, column names, and so on. And then the business metadata or custom metadata, and that can be any of the classification or retrieval mechanisms that are important for your business. Okay, so again, I'll show you that in a moment with the snapshots. But as I start talking about that custom metadata, a question that may surface when you start thinking about it is, how do we assign the custom metadata? So how, when data arrives, do we automatically put in things like the retention time frame, or classify it as being sensitive, or mark it with any custom retrieval information like the clinical trial that's important for your business? That leads into the final point here, which is lifecycle management. Navigator offers a policy engine that will automatically classify, categorize, and enforce any of the metadata policies that are important for you. So say, for example, data arrives in a certain directory, you always want to mark that as being sales data. Or data comes from a certain user and has a column with a certain name, you may want to assign that a certain security level. Whatever custom rules you want to enforce, and this also includes invoking partner products for data profiling, for data quality, and any kind of other curation or stewardship capabilities, we can do that automatically. Okay, so that's the background. And Ben, if you would please advance to the next slide, and I'll start showing some snapshots. Thank you. Okay, so here's a quick view of auditing. If you're familiar with auditing, this is a standard audit log. But what's important to realize here is the fact that it's a standard audit log that spans so many diverse interactions with the data coming from so many different places. So you can see here I've highlighted a SQL query that captures or a Hive operation from a particular user named training. The IP address is listed there, and we captured the exact SQL query that's run. But you can also see in here there's HDFS access. So HDFS is the Hadoop file system. Hive is one of the SQL interfaces. Impala is another faster, more ad hoc SQL interface. All of this we capture in a single location. Okay, so that's auditing. And next slide, please. Inside here, this is column level lineage. Okay, so I actually generated this when I did some simple transformations in a Hadoop cluster here at Cloudera. And all I did is I ran the standard SQL commands, and behind the scenes, Navigator captured column level lineage. You can see here on the left-hand side, there's a table called sales data. This is a simple set of transformations. On the right-hand side, we have 3 artifacts that are generated from that table. One is called sales by region, another invalid sales data, and the third one at the bottom is count by region. And in the middle, we have the actual transformations. So we can zoom in on any one of these artifacts. If we zoom in on the middle widgets, that will give us the SQL command that was used to create that transformation. On the left-hand side, we can expand and see the actual columns. So you can see S_neighbor and S_price are 2 columns that feed into all the other tables. Just as a small point here, we even emphasize if a column is being used in the select clause or the where clause. A solid line means that that column is flowing into the next table in the select clause. A dotted line means it's in the where clause. And we provide this visibility or this kind of lineage for all transformations that take place inside Hadoop, including Hive and MapReduce and Yarn, Oozie. If you're familiar with all these components, where we, with structured transformations, we capture column level lineage. As you can see here, S_neighbor and S_price are both columns. For semi-structured or unstructured, we capture file level lineage, but we also have mechanisms to work with partners and also with customers to incorporate column level lineage directly into those more obscure file formats. Okay, so this is lineage, and thank you. Perfect. Here you can see searching through metadata. So, one of the biggest challenges with Hadoop when your deployment grows to any reasonable size is keeping track of what's in there, knowing which files are old, which artifacts you don't want to keep anymore, which ones contain sensitive data, which tables are owned by certain users, you name it, any kind of retrieval. And inside here, you just see a very simple kind of searching mechanism in Navigator, where on the left-hand side, we're looking for Hive tables. So these are SQL tables inside Hadoop. And you can see source type is Hive. A couple points down, you see table is checked off. We're looking at Hive tables, not Hive columns, for example. And if we further click down, which you can't see here, we've restricted just by the username training. But all this kind of searching is really easy to do inside Navigator. And this is really important for Hadoop because being able to, Hadoop is great for storing lots of artifacts, but if you can't retrieve those artifacts when you need them, they're of questionable value. So we fully address that here. So that's our searching. And I think the final slide here is the policy engine. Okay, so inside here, I talked about the fact that once you can retrieve artifacts, let's say all the files that are older than a certain time frame or anything owned by a certain user, or anything that is marked as being personally identifiable information but isn't encrypted. On the left-hand side here, you can see an example policy that says encrypt sensitive data. And we have a search query. This is using Solr search syntax if you're familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it, you can use our point and click interface to generate those strings. But either way, what we're looking for here on the left is anytime there's something that is sensitive data or PII data inside the system but isn't encrypted, we actually will encrypt it. Okay, that's using our policy engine. On the right-hand side, if you shift over there, you'll see that first line is the search query saying anything from HDFS that was created from the start of time to 7 years ago. Okay, so anything older than 7 years. Once a day, we check, and if anything matches that criteria, we send it off for archiving. Okay, so this is the idea of this is how can you make sure that you have ensure really hygiene of the data in your system, making sure that it's curated and in a way that makes sense for your business, and is straightforward for your users to be able to retrieve. And that's all enabled through the policy engine that's part of Navigator. So next slide, please. Finally, actually, this was just a zoomed-in view of the same policy that you saw beforehand, if you want to look with the text a little bit bigger. Okay, so with that, thank you very much, and I'll hand the call back over to Ben, who's going to give a more detailed case study.
Great, thanks, Mark. What we wanted to cover next was a case study that where we've implemented Cloudera Navigator as well as Cloudera Hadoop and Cloudera Manager at a Fortune 500 financial services firm. And so one of the things that we ran into as we started that implementation was that there was a need to understand data governance, understand what was getting ingested into the enterprise data hub, and be able to capture that information as things were coming in. So they kind of immediately recognized that need for data governance and saw the gap in Hadoop around data governance. So the flexibility of Hadoop also had that challenge of how do I understand what's getting ingested and what am I going to do with that information? How do I collect metadata? And so they had CapTech and Cloudera come in and build a solution to address their data governance needs within their enterprise data hub. So just to touch on, the requirements, what they were looking for. They're ingesting a large number of files every day, so upwards of 20,000 files a day that they need to be able to catalog, keep track of, and understand metadata around. Schema discovery, so we talked about that earlier, that concept of I'm getting all of this data, how do I understand what I've got, how do I share that with my data scientists, the schema that I understand today, and more importantly, the schema that I discover tomorrow as I learn more about my data. Mark touched on sensitive information, and so being able to govern and keep track of PII information, prior to entry into the enterprise data hub, or being able to flag sensitive information after the fact, and provide the ability to review and approve that data by the data governance group, by the data stewardship team, to confirm that we understand what the data is that we've got and that we're managing it correctly. Data lineage at the column level. So I think this is one of the things that is very interesting about Cloudera Navigator and is a differentiator in my mind, is that ability to share lineage at the column level. So, it's really important in the financial services industry to be able to do that when you have regulatory reports being delivered. The question comes back is, tell me exactly where that data is coming from, and being able to see that lineage and those transformations on what's going on through Cloudera Navigator has been something that is really critical to the success of the project. And then finally, how do we understand what data is coming into our enterprise data hub and what data is leaving, right? So we know that Hadoop isn't the end-all, be-all solution for data management. We have other pieces and parts within the enterprise that are going to be delivering data into the Hadoop ecosystem and pulling data out of the Hadoop ecosystem. So how do we capture those ingress and egress points? So those are the type of requirements that we were trying to solve at this financial services client. And so what we did, we took the Cloudera Navigator product as our core engine for capturing all of the metadata, both business and technical metadata. And we use that as our back-end solution. Navigator, I don't think Mark mentioned, but everything that Mark showed is available via a RESTful API. So we were able to leverage those APIs and build a custom user experience for the organization, but still leverage all of the capabilities that Navigator has behind the scenes. So the lineage capabilities, the ability to tag sensitive information, the policy engine that Mark talked about that allows us to trigger off actions as we see data getting ingested into the environment. All of those things we're able to leverage from the Navigator tool, but at the same time be able to enrich that information with specific things that our client wanted to see that weren't native to Navigator. We did that through a set of RESTful APIs. The other thing that we were able to build is what we call an application and workflow governance engine. So providing the data stewards and data governance team the ability to be flagged and notified of data as it's getting ingested to the environment, and specifically data that was of interest to them around personally identifiable information or sensitive data. The data stewardship team wanted to know when that data was entering into the enterprise data hub so that they could review and make sure that it was being secured appropriately. So that workflow engine capability was built leveraging the policy engine that Mark spoke about. So as data is getting ingested, being able to flag and understand the types of sensitive information that are coming into the enterprise data hub, and then publish that out for the data stewards to review and take action on, and actually prevent data usage until the security review had been completed on that data that was getting ingested into the environment. So in terms of results, we've been able to capture all business and technical metadata for all of the data that's been ingested into the Enterprise Data Hub, and that's now available in Navigator for search and discovery. So everything that is ingested into the Hadoop environment can now be searched, discovered, and viewed. We also have the ability to see full attribute level lineage, so this ties into being able to respond to audit reports and compliance related requests. We have that detailed lineage available. Data governance review and approval workflow process. So we now have the ability for stewards to be notified when sensitive information is being delivered into the environment. When users are updating or modifying metadata, we have specific business rules that have been developed by the data governance and data stewardship community on what they want to see, and we can notify them real time as those metadata attributes are being triggered in the environment and being populated. We can alert them of what's going on. So we think that it's been a really great partnership with Cloudera, and I think successful from a client perspective to be able to track and catalog everything that's going on in the enterprise data hub.
Yeah,
so lessons learned.
Really agreed, Ben. Just to add that, I mean, it was a great engagement, and we were very lucky. I mean, the customer was great as well. We had some great stakeholders on the customer side too. So it's a combination of, two partners working together with a customer, and they provided great requirements. And I think we did something very unique here, but that's the great thing. The nature of this is, the whole open source architecture means it's very easy to plug and adapt it to your enterprise while still taking full benefit of the underlying architecture.
Absolutely. So lessons learned in that engagement. Again, we touched on this earlier, making sure we have the business involved from day one, and understanding, in this case, the stewardship community, what information they were looking for, what they wanted to learn and discover about data as it was getting ingested into the environment. Being agile. I think that's critical in the ever-changing world of big data, and being able to adapt and utilize new tools as they come out. And then, I mentioned the API set that Navigator provides, right? So building in a modular fashion, being able to leverage a suite of APIs and put a custom front end on that. Being able to do that throughout the environment allows you to be more agile when things change. Defining data governance processes. So we've talked a lot about data governance today. The rules of data governance don't change because you go to Hadoop, but they're different. There are different considerations. Just that statement that Steve made earlier around schema on read versus schema on write has huge implications when we start talking about how we manage and how we govern our data. So defining that process up front before you have a data hub or data lake that's full and you're not ready to manage that, having that discussion up front and learning how to catalog that information, I think, is key. Access and security controls. So it's critical that we understand how we want to secure both our metadata and our actual data up front. There is a lot of evolving security out there, and so understanding what's important to be secured, what's not important to be secured, and what that strategy is going to be, and having that discussion up front versus trying to implement something after the fact. And then training, again, making sure that your organization is getting familiar with all of these tools, getting the education that they need, and sharing both within the organization and within the community. And that's the last point here, is being in the data space for most of my career and spending time doing, BI development and data warehousing with all of the traditional tools that we've all heard of before. The community around open source and around Hadoop in general is amazing. And so, being able to reach out to partners like Cloudera or just in general the open source community, I think is something that has really changed the way I think about, working, changed the way I think about working, frankly, because of the support that's available. And that's been an eye-opener for me coming out of the more traditional data management world. So, what are the next steps? What's the approach? How do you take this to the next level if you're in a proof of concept mode or thinking about going to Hadoop? I think you have a plethora of options. Certainly, CapTech has an approach to come in and be able to do an assessment and evaluation and understand where you're at on the data maturity curve, and be able to provide some recommendations and guidance on the process and people needed to be able to support your move into the big data space. And then obviously Cloudera has the technology component with the Cloudera Navigator, Cloudera Manager, and then the CDH Cloudera Hadoop. So I think there's some good next steps. If you need more information, obviously we have the CapTech's website and Cloudera's website, both available, and you can reach out to Steve, Mark, or myself with any questions that you have. And with that, I think we have a number of questions that have come in. So let me start off with the first one that we've got. This one looks like it's from Mark. Mark, how does Navigator compare to enterprise-wide Lineage and Metadata products?
Yeah, so how Navigator compares with enterprise. Well, first, let's go through a couple of those. I think in particular this question could be, how does Navigator's Lineage and Metadata fit in with products such as Informatica or IBM InfoSphere, these broader enterprise-wide Lineage and Metadata products? So we draw a very clear box. If you were to have your whole enterprise environments drawn on a whiteboard and you had Hadoop, let's just say right in the center, but it could be anywhere, you could draw a box around Hadoop, and everything inside that box is where we provide governance. Okay, so that's where we have the unified metadata. That's where we have the lineage. Okay, and then if you looked at, say, Informatica, everything outside of that box is where Informatica provides lineage and metadata. So there's a very clear separation between we provide that full visibility into Hadoop, and then these broader enterprise frameworks have the framework exactly for that, for broader lineage and metadata. And with the REST APIs that Ben mentioned, we have very clean, in many cases, out-of-the-box integration with these broader tools. So we see these broader products as completely complementary for anyone who, and this is basically everyone, who has data outside of Hadoop in addition to inside Hadoop, and full interoperability between the two.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. So the next question, I think I'll start, and Mark or Steve, you may want to chime in on this one. So the question is, can you discuss the volume of metadata supporting audit, lineage, analysis, et cetera, in terms of the percent of overall data size? So I know in some of my experiences, what I've seen is that it's very dependent on the activities and transactions and types of work that you're doing within Hadoop as to how much metadata you're going to generate from an audit perspective. So I don't know that I have a specific percentage, but I think it's very variable depending on the type of workload that you have. I don't know, Mark or Steve, if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. This is Mark, and Steve, if you want to add something afterwards, please go ahead, but hopefully I can answer that on the Navigator side. Okay, so the volume of data with respect to auditing and the volume of data with respect to lineage, I'm going to cover those separately. First off, with respect to auditing, it's very clear, okay? So we actually have 500 bytes per audit activity plus the size of the SQL query where there is one. Okay, so and this is all separate from the actual system that's being audited. So we have a separate database. There's actually really no performance impact, but we do have that storage impact for every execution, every auditable entry takes 500 bytes plus the size of the SQL query. On the Lineage part, again, it's a storage impact because all of this happens behind the scenes. There isn't a performance impact. The storage really grows as a function of the number of job executions. Okay, so I kind of briefly mentioned that the way we calculate Lineage is very different from most approaches to Lineage. Most approaches to Lineage are based off of design time artifacts and then visually represent what the design time artifact intended to transform. What we do in Navigator is we analyze all the runtime artifacts. So that means every single MapReduce job, every single SQL query, every single anything that runs in the system, we will reverse engineer Lineage from that artifact. So what that means is the storage implication, very similar to auditing, grows based off of the amount of activity in the system. If you have one job that runs once a day versus one job that runs thousands of times a day, the one that runs thousands of times a day would have thousands of times more storage implications. But again, the storage impact is really minimal. We have it stored in a highly optimized format in Solar. And if there are questions around the scale, we could always deal with that in more detail.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So the next question, I think, is also for you, Mark. Does Navigator archive at the data element level and at the file level?
So I'm going to assume that this question is about that policy engine example that I gave where we had archiving defined. I had HDFS files from the start of time to 7 years ago and then mark it for archiving. Now, let me be clear. The policy engine in particular doesn't do the archiving. We can set up the policies to hand off archiving to an archiving component such as backup and disaster recovery, which is another component of Cloudera Enterprise or a third-party product. So basically what we do is we set up any search criteria and any frequency of the search criteria and then hand off the job to whichever component you want to hand that off to. We currently do that through JMS integration. We likely will be integrating Kafka if you're familiar with that component. We may even have explicit invocation of partner products directly from the product at some point in the future. But right now is just sending messages over to JMS. So that means anything you can search for. So I would say in general, this is done at the artifact level. So where we have customers interested in this, it's not at anything more granular than individual files or individual partitions inside tables. But if you happen to come up with a use case where it makes sense to do something more granular, we certainly can specify the search criteria for something more granular, but there would have to be a handoff to a component that understands how to consume that. So that's a bit of a broad answer that I gave, but that actually is the answer.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question, and it ties into that one, Mark. Do you see any other data governance or data quality vendors or tools in the big data market, and are they currently or do they integrate with Navigator and or Cloudera?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is partly, this is a very broad market, and I would say when it comes to unified auditing, unified lineage, unified metadata, we actually are the only one who does that. Okay, so you certainly, the folks on the call could look through the competitive landscape and validate that and all that. But that aside, in terms of the core capabilities of Navigator, then there's this whole broader set of governance. Like, for example, our policy engine, which can invoke data preparation tools, data quality tools. There's a whole set of partners that we already have established partnerships with and ones that we're in the process of establishing partnerships with to have interoperability with all of these products. So I would say most generally this framework of governance that Navigator offers is unique in the big data space, but there are a variety of very specific, I shouldn't say very specific, but deeper tools that we integrate with in those areas of, for example, data quality and data preparation and business glossaries and so on. Okay, so I hope that answers it.
Great, thanks. We have one final question, and this one is for Steve. Steve, you mentioned PCI compliance earlier in the discussion. Can you speak a little bit more to where we can get more information on PCI compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. If you reach out to me directly, so there's a months ago when they went through the compliance, actually did a nice press release with us, and we're actually doing some interesting work with them specifically around this area. So yeah, please do reach out to me directly. And all through, we talked about a lot of regulations. The interesting thing about all these regulations is they're going to get worse, they're going to change more rapidly, and so having an environment that can adapt to that is critical. So, as Mark said, I mean, in terms of the Hadoop environment, no one comes close to what we're doing. In fact, I think Mark and his team were really very visionary in doing this, and it was actually one of the reasons I joined Cloudera. But what's more interesting is where the stuff is going to go. These requirements are just going to grow, and this very flexible architecture the team put together means that it's very easy to plug in those other components and push Lineage out to other tools and other pieces. So it's a very nice architecture. So, and like Ben was saying earlier, I'm 6 months inside Cloudera. It's a very different world. I grew up in a traditional enterprise software environment, and it's the scope of change and the way things get done so quickly here is just mind-blowing. So it's a very fun place to be.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And thank you all for attending our webinar today. We'll have this available on our corporate websites in the next couple of days. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Steve, or Mark. And I appreciate everyone's time.
Have a good day, guys. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.